Thanks so much for the introduction. So as the opening says, I'm going to talk a little bit about the anthropology department here at GW, our grad programs in particular. I will say a bit more about myself in a second, but I'm the director of the master's program. In the past, I've been the director of the PhD program as well. So if you have questions about PhD stuff specifically, I'm happy to answer those at the end. If we could leap to the third slide, that would be awesome. Okay, so just a tiny little bit about me, which I promise will be relevant. So this is kind of a word cloud about me. I'm a linguistic anthropologist and also a sociocultural anthropologist. Most of my field work has been done in Brazil, where I've done a bunch of work on music. I'm kind of primarily a musician and a musical anthropologist. But I've also done work on intellectual property, digital piracy, cell phone technology. I'm doing a project here in Washington, D.C., which I'll talk about in a little bit later, on the relationship between technology, cell phone use, and how it's being used in Washington, D.C. schools. Then I got a couple other side projects too. We'll talk about those. And then, of course, I'm a dog owner. That is Oz there in the bottom right-hand corner, who's an important part of my life. All right, so that's me. Just so you know who you're talking to. Next slide. So just let me talk a little bit about what is anthropology. So next slide after this. So generally, there's some debate about this in anthropology. And one of the things I got to say I like about anthropology is that anthropology is a discipline that has a real tradition of self-critique and self-consideration. But let's just start with this definition. By and large, the study of anthropology is the study of human difference and also the study of human origins. And there are a bunch of concepts that are really important to that. I'm going to focus a little bit more on kind of the sociocultural, linguistic, and to some extent the archaeological part of that. We do have a separate Masters of Science program that focuses on biological anthropology, which tends to delve some more into those human origins, evolutions kinds of questions. But we as anthropologists spend a lot of time talking about culture, about language, fieldwork as our primary methodology. If you do a graduate program here, you'll definitely be learning fieldwork, which is one of the fundamental things that we do. How do you go and do long-term research that gets you really deep into an organization or a social group? We take comparison really seriously. Part of that is diversity work. We're really good at qualitative methods. I'll talk a little bit more about the kind of marketing potential for anthropology and how we're really good at marketing our qualitative methods. We do some quantitative methods work as well, but we tend to kind of focus on those sorts of major things. Next slide, and then we'll sort of transition to the next one. Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. So anthropology, this will be a review for many of you, but by and large, we're a four-field discipline. And one of the things to note about GW is that we are a four-fields department. We're a sort of vanishing group. There aren't a ton of four-fields departments left in the United States. Things have fragmented so that biological anthropology has kind of moved off into its own quadrant, but we don't do that here. We practice a four fields approach to the discipline, which means we bring together sociocultural anthropology, biological anthropology, a lot of those human origins and evolutionary questions, kind of the more kind of hard science approach, linguistic anthropology, which is really more what I practice. And then archaeology kind of straddles the boundaries. There's some archaeology in sort of the historical approach to more recent cultures and societies, but there's also archaeology extending into biological anthropological work as well. And as I say, the important thing in this department is you will get a grounding in all four of those fields. There are courses that you do called pro-seminar courses, basic foundational courses. You choose three. You can place out of one if you have substantial experience. To kind of really get a grounding in the overall kind of heft of the discipline and the historical kind of tradition of anthropology, broadly speaking. So as I say, we are a four fields department. So next slide. So the big question, that's anthropology. It's fine. Yeah, you're in the perfect spot, Seth. Thank you. Why study it here? What is it about GW that makes us special? So let me focus so we can go on one more slide. So, some broad things to say about anthropology, broadly speaking, and then, to focus a little bit more on why GW and why Washington, D.C. Anthropology is useful because we are interested in, I would like to say, depth, not breadth. So we are not the discipline that's going to show up and do a quick survey and have people, fill out a questionnaire. We might use questionnaires, but anthropologists are really concerned to go and stay for a long period of time and really kind of dig down in depth into culture and history. Because we go for long periods of time and do this kind of extended field work, we're pretty good at making unexpected connections between things. So for example, we had a postdoctoral student in our department about a decade ago who was doing this fascinating work on dental work, on sort of teeth, how people took care of their teeth in the American South. She was working in Appalachia. And that work on teeth led to all these fascinating connections about labor and religion and society and culture. That's just one example of the ways in which anthropology is good at putting unexpected connections together. Anthropologists get hired in a bunch of different places. The obvious places are, kind of museum studies. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. The obvious places are kind of museums, education, development work, but there's a lot of other kinds of industries that are calling on anthropologists now, particularly digital media and technology, anywhere you have to use qualitative methods. And I've pictured a couple of famous folks who are anthropologists, Hugh Laurie in the top, of course, House, and then this other show, and then Kerry Washington, who was actually a GW alumni as well. So there's just a couple of sort of very broad things about anthropology. Next slide, a couple other things. Anthropologists are really good at going back and forth between what people say they're doing and what they are actually doing. And this is an important thing about anthropological methods. Yeah, we do interviews. We go and we talk to people for long periods of time. We can get to know them well. But we also do something called participant observation, which means we don't just talk, we also watch, we look. And what you often find when you mingle those kinds of methodological approaches together is that people engage in a plurality of different practices. They don't just tell you what they do, they also do some things which you need to be able to observe as well. So putting these two kinds of methods together, not just the talking, not just the in-depth talking, but also the observation as well, and the participation. Many of us try and do some of the things that we are analyzing. For instance, in my book on music, Brazilian country music, I learned to play it. Not super well, but I learned to play it as part of the doing. I would say that for the book on Brazilian country music, there was a substantial portion of that was spent bull riding. No, I did not become a bull rider, although, I rode horses for a long time and that was helpful. So anyway, participant observation, not just doing interviews, but also watching and listening and tuning into those other aspects of the environment that might not necessarily get explicitly expressed. And what that means, and this is not to diss other fields, because economics and psychology and political science, these are very, very worthwhile disciplines, and we partake of little bits and pieces of them. But the point is that anthropology is able to get at information that other fields can't necessarily get at. We established that long-term trust. Super quick example. When I was down in Brazil doing my first research project on Brazilian country music, folks would they were kind of embarrassed about country music, and I would say, so tell me about country music. And they'd say, no, I do not listen to that stuff, it's garbage. And after I got to know people well, this was back in the days of iPods, I would see, they'd pass me their iPod and I'd scroll through and I'd see, okay, you told me you didn't listen to country music, there's a bunch of it on here, what's going on? Let's get deeper. How did I get to that kind of information? Well, I knew them longer. I was able to establish trust. The point is that anthropology's approach to qualitative methods do a really good job of going deeper than many of the disciplines. Not to criticize those other disciplines, which do really well at breadth and sort of numbers, but anthropology is able to really kind of dig down deep. And the next slide, I'll return to this issue of careers in anthropology. So here's some obvious ones, and then we'll look into some less obvious ones as well. So lots of our graduates in the master's program, and obviously in the PhD program as well, go on to careers teaching anthropology. We have a bunch of folks that do that. Also, archaeologists train here and go on and have careers in archaeology. Archaeology, sometimes in strictly academic settings, sometimes in professional settings as well. And I think Steve Lubkman, the other coordinator, is on the call too, and he can talk a little bit more about archaeology specifically if that comes up in the question and answer. Plenty of our folks go on as forensic scientists, archivists. Museum work is very, very common with anthropologists. A lot of folks end up in social work, journalism, development. Here are some of the less obvious ones, though. A bunch of folks who get graduate degrees in anthropology go on doing user research in a variety of different modalities, market research, user-centered strategy and design. My wife is actually an example of that. She got a master's degree in sociocultural anthropology and now runs a web design company here in Washington, D.C. Lots of folks also go on in various aspects of library science as well. So I just want to underscore the importance of some of these digital and honestly NGO and corporate environments too, where you wouldn't necessarily think about anthropology being applicable, but we are. So here's just a few details about our department. So we have about 110 undergraduate majors. Actually, that number is a little higher now. If you include biological anthropology and archaeology, it's closer to 140. We have this is 110 just for basic anthropology majors. We have about 81 graduate students. We have 21 core faculty and 3 full-time staff to support us. So we're, medium large kind of size department, but you still get a lot of personal attention to, which I'll talk about in more detail. So next slide. Let me talk a little bit in more detail about the actual master's program itself. So as noted, we are a 4 fields department. We encourage students to focus on 3 of the pro seminars: biological anthropology, linguistic anthropology, sociocultural anthropology, and archaeology. Within that context, we offer a considerable amount of flexibility. So you can take courses across the anthropology curriculum. We often do a lot of collaborating with other departments, American Studies, sometimes biology as well, history. But within the context of our major, we have 3 concentrations that you can choose, and those tend to go along with kind of some common career trajectories in anthropology. So we have a concentration in international development. Steve Lubkman is the coordinator for that. We have a concentration in museum training, and Dr. Jeffrey Blomster is the coordinator there. And then a 3rd concentration in health, science, and society that really brings together medical anthropology with the study of science, technology, and sort of society, broadly speaking. We are a 2-year major by and large, 36 credits. That's 12 courses over the course of those 2 years. As I say, we ask folks to do 3 of the 4 possible pro seminars. You can do all 4 if you want to, and actually plenty of folks do. And then there's also the option to, even within the context of that 3, if you choose to only do 3, if you have substantial experience in one, you can place it out. One important aspect of our program is a culminating project. Plenty of our folks choose to do thesis research. I'll talk about funding in a minute, but there's a way to get some funding for some summer research. So sometimes between the summer of the 1st and 2nd years, folks will do some thesis research, which they'll then write up in their 2nd year. So thesis is one way to do a culminating project. Another approach to a culminating project is to prepare a journal article. And usually what folks do for that is they take a paper that they've written over the course of their 2 years, and they enrich it and prepare it for submission to a journal. Sometimes you end up submitting it to a journal and sometimes you don't. It's an exercise to get you to think about how to make your research shareable in the world. And frequently I would say that these writing samples go on to be used in applications for other jobs when people are applying for other jobs or when they're applying for graduate school. These culminating projects are really useful in those contexts. They also really focus your research and help you kind of provide a kind of a focal point. Yes, Steve just IM'd me, and Steve has joined the call. Steve, do you want to add anything at this point? You want to jump in or?
No, I think that's and sorry, I'm reading as the second Alex Dent, I think, on this call, just the matter of the link. No, I think Alex has described it really well. A lot of students really do use the journal article exercise for professional output. And so sometimes, for example, one model that a lot of people have used is if they're very interested in a particular topic or area, they can do, in essence, sort of a really robust state-of-the-art literature review. And that can go a real long way, actually, in sort of showing that you know something about a particular area, that you're interested in professionally. It sort of establishes your credentials as an expert, even if it's not necessarily published. It's sort of what we call great literature. Um, so there are different ways in which you can meet that requirement. But jump
Yeah,
off if you need.
that's well said. And I think the primary focus is to help you kind of focus your studies and kind of make the rubber hit the road. Let's go to the next. Let's go to the next slide. So some more program highlights. We work closely with our master students. You develop a mentor here in the course of your first year that you work closely with. We're a very flexible program. We allow you to take courses in other departments, and also we are part of a consortium of DC schools that includes American University, Georgetown, Catholic, and University of Maryland, and Gallaudet as well, Steve? I can't remember.
I think
So,
Howard's in that too.
oh, absolutely, Howard is in that. Yep. The DC advantage is important. So we are, of course, in Washington, D.C. The one sort of downside, and I'll come to this when I talk about cost, is that it's not a cheap place to live. Some of you who are here may know that. But one of the great advantages to being in DC is with respect to governance and policy, NGOs, there are tremendous opportunities here to do concrete internships. And most of our students do some kind of internship in development or museum studies or whatever area that they happen to be interested in. There's just so many possibilities here. So Steve, did you want to say more about internships? You have a ton of experience advising these.
Yeah, I could say it just works a little bit differently than other really good schools. And I would draw comparisons to, let's say University of Wisconsin or Penn State. Those are terrific schools, but in some sense, sort of the abundance of opportunities that there are with respect to internships and sort of plugging into the professional world that would use your skills is almost unique. I mean, maybe New York would be comparable, but in some ways, DC really is unique for students who are interested in international development or in policy. And I think the way we do that here is we really let it be guided by students and student interests. And so we'll give you some pointers on places that you can look for internships. But in 23 years of teaching, I've never had a situation. Students usually, they identify the organizations they're interested in. They will go and speak with those and then bring back sort of a proposal as to what the internship will be. And what we try to do is work with you and make sure that internship is actually contributing to your trajectory. I mean, because truth be told, in DC, there are also plenty of places that are glad to sort of strip mine your time and have you pour coffee and do photocopies, and that's not going to be helpful. So the fact that we're able to sort of provide that kind of supervision really make make sure that the internship is contributing to your trajectory, and then work with you on it could be a final paper that you do that we review, and sometimes we will review something that you do for the organization, and that could be anything from research to some other type of output that really provides you with an opportunity to use what you've learned in the course in sort of a real world setting, so to speak.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly acknowledge in the Q&A that there's some terrific questions that are building up, and I'm going to leave quite a bit of we're going to leave quite a bit of time at the end of this to address those. There's some really terrific questions that are coming up, so I promise we will get to them. Let's jump to the next slide here and talk a little bit about funding. As noted, DC is an expensive town to live in. It's not a cheap place. There are some opportunities to kind of supplement. So we do have a limited number of teaching and research fellowships. We do our best to provide at least one semester of teaching fellowship support to students that are here. And the way that works is in the semester before the one you're interested. Usually that doesn't happen in the first year, by the way. Usually we do that in either in the spring of the first year, not your first semester, just to have you kind of come here and find your feet. But usually what you do is you express interest, and much of that to the central office, and much of that is in our introductory courses: Introduction to Sociocultural Anthropology, Introduction to Linguistic Anthropology. There's also a limited number of research fellowships available with active faculty projects. I'll talk a little bit more about those towards the end. One opportunity for research funds comes in the form of our summer Kotlo research grants. You apply for those in January. We make those awards in February and March, and those facilitate going off and doing research projects, often in the summertime. Students have been all over the world to do Kotlo-funded research. We provide, I believe, as much as $1,800 to go somewhere and do research. Some folks will stay in DC and use Kotlo funds for that. There's also some funding through Columbian College that we in the department do not control. A lot of that is awarded based on their reading of academic transcripts. They'll be able to answer more questions about that. Then, of course, there's work opportunities here at the university. And one other positive thing about Washington, D.C., given that it's a big town, is there are a lot of opportunities to work here in D.C. And many of our students do take some kind of outside employment. Let's jump to the next slide. Some other cool things about GW's anthropology department. So we host a journal here. The editor is Dr. Richard Grinker. The journal was founded in 1921, originally, I believe, a Catholic university, but it's here now. We are now the fourth most cited journal in sociocultural and linguistic anthropology. It gives frequently students the opportunity to do some editorial work. It's a neat opportunity. Steve, jump in if I'm missing anything. Next slide. So yeah, well, this would actually be a great place for you to jump in. So faculty have active research projects that are going on all the time. There is some, it's finite need, but there is some need for student labor affiliated with these programs. And Steve, this is your project, so I'm going to shut up.
No, there are a variety of different projects, and some are long-term projects. The project that Alex is throwing up here is the Slave Rex project. And that is an international project where we are working on 3 continents and 7, 8, 9 countries. I don't remember at the moment, but it uses archaeology to recover and preserve shipwrecks that were related to the slave trade, and then works with local communities and scholars in those countries to help them build the capacity to do their own research programs and to benefit from that heritage in a whole variety of different ways, whether it's from public education or museums to cultural tourism. But over the, in this particular case, over the years, I'm trying to think, we probably, over the last decade, we have probably had somewhere in the vicinity of 12 to 15 students, graduate students, who have worked in different capacities with the project. Sometimes there are more openings, sometimes there are fewer. We also have work study students who are undergrads. And it depends on the interest that people have. A number of those students have actually gone on and sort of leapfrogged from there to PhD programs. Diogo Oliveira is at William & Mary. People like Sean Reed have completed at Syracuse and now teach at places. I think he teaches right now at UVA. This is just one. This is, I think, one of probably maybe not as long standing as Kubifora, but it's one of the longer term projects. But there are many projects, and they kind of rotate and they come and go. And Alex, could mention a whole number of other ones. And I think where professors see an opportunity for students to get involved, they're always interested in trying to find a way. And sometimes those are paid opportunities. Sometimes those are opportunities that provide sort of an opportunity for people to go abroad, support that. Other times, it's on a volunteer basis. But there are certainly quite a few projects. Alex could tell you about the cell phone project and others. I think it's a really exciting place in terms of what's going on in research, especially sort of public-facing research that's trying to bring not just do sort of research only for academic purposes, that's important, but also sort of bring it into the public square and try to engage with contemporary issues, whether it's racism or it's or it's how we remember the past or technology and so forth.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. So, along those lines, the next slide is about the cell phone project, which I mentioned briefly at the opening. It's a collaboration between myself, Joel Kuiper, who's a linguistic anthropologist here in the department, and Joshua Bell, who is the curator of globalization, which is a huge title at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. We've been working for 12 years with students in Washington, D.C. public schools. We've made a very important discovery, which is that high school students use their phones a lot. But I would say that this research project has employed many students over the years, and it has led to an exhibit that Josh Bell and his team have created over the Smithsonian. If you happen to be in DC or you happen to come through DC, I encourage you to go over to the Museum of Natural History and check out the cell phone exhibit there that was in part an outgrowth of this project. This is one project, and the next slide is another project that is ongoing here. The Rituals and the Making project is this ongoing project. It's actually gone beyond 5 years at this point, that looks at death and mourning in a sort of post-COVID-19, well, not post-COVID-19, but a COVID-19 world, looks at mourning and memory and how that has been shaped by digital culture. There's been a lot of public-facing work. This is an important point that Steve makes. A lot of the research projects, both archaeological but also sociocultural linguistic, really are focused outwards on kind of promulgating our research to broader audiences. Our next slide takes just a quick look at some recent hires. And we have 21 faculty in the department, and this isn't necessarily representative, but these are folks who've come into the department recently. We're really excited that they've joined us. Dr. Diana Parto Pedrasas from Colombia. She does this really amazing work on landmine abatement and the use of dogs to abate landmines in Colombia. Dr. Lanika Welcome does this really interesting work in Trinidad on race and policing, and sort of the relationship between forms of imagery and kind of perceptions of race and technology. Steve, do you want to talk about Dr. Agbalusi's work at all? I also can.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, so this, once again, this is, Dr. Agbalusi works in sort of Steve's domain, but he's an archaeologist of the Black Atlantic, thinking about sort of the broad kind of domain of slavery, and the kind of history of slavery, but kind of between Africa, the United States, Latin America, and Europe. So these are three people who we've hired in the last couple of years. Representative, I think, of the kind of exciting directions that the department is going in now. Our next slide is kind of some nuts and bolts, and then I want to get to these really good questions because there's 14 of them in them. Okay, so I'm the first year MA advisor. I'm going to be your first. Wow, that's a really old picture. You too, Steve. We got to update our pics. So I'm the advisor for admissions-based questions. Steve takes care of a lot of the second year stuff, logistics, and Dave Braun is the advisor for the Masters in Science program in the biological anthropology sort of wing of things. They do a separate information session. And then our last slide is, I think, just contact information. So with that, we want to make sure and get some time for these questions.